Let's be honest. Most people think they know about sex. They've seen it in movies, read about it online, maybe even experienced it firsthand. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Knowing what sex is and understanding what sex means are two very different things. Most people grow up thinking of sex as a physical act, something that happens between two bodies, driven by attraction or desire. But sex is far more layered than that. It is not only about the body, it is also about the mind, emotions, and energy shared between two people. When two people connect sexually, they aren't just touching skin, they are exchanging vulnerability, trust, and often unspoken feelings. That's why the experience can feel completely different depending on who it's with, what emotions are involved, and the mental or emotional state of each person. The body remembers touch, tone, and emotion, which means that every encounter leaves a trace, even if we try to treat it as something casual. When sex is viewed only through a physical lens, it can lose depth and meaning. People may start chasing the physical sensation alone, mistaking pleasure for connection. This can lead to emptiness afterward, the sense that something was missing, even if the act itself was enjoyable. That feeling comes from a lack of emotional and energetic alignment. True intimacy comes when both people are present, not just physically there, but mentally and emotionally open, aware of each other's comfort, and connected beyond the surface level. Sex also has a powerful psychological component. How we feel about ourselves, our confidence, and our past experiences all influence how we show up sexually. If someone carries guilt, trauma, or insecurity, those feelings can shape how they experience intimacy. On the other hand, when people approach sex with self-awareness, kindness, and respect, it becomes a space for healing and connection rather than just release. In that way, sex can be transformative, can bring people closer to themselves and each other. When we begin to see sex as more than just physical, we learn to treat it with mindfulness. We become more aware of what we are giving and receiving on emotional and energetic levels. We start communicating better, being honest about our needs, and valuing consent not just as a rule, but as an expression of care. This shift changes everything. It turns sex from a momentary act into a meaningful experience that honors both people involved, reminding us that physical pleasure is only one small part of something much deeper. Pornography and media have become the primary sources of sexual education. For many people, shaping their understanding of what sex should look and feel like. The problem is that most of what is shown on screens is performance, not reality. It is designed to entertain, exaggerate, and sell fantasy, not to reflect genuine intimacy or emotional connection. This distorted portrayal teaches people to focus on appearance, stamina, and technique, while ignoring communication, consent, and emotional awareness. As a result, many grow up equating good sex with performance rather than presence, chasing perfection instead of authenticity. In most adult films, everything looks effortless and idealized. Bodies are airbrushed, reactions are scripted, and emotions are removed from the equation. What we don't see are the pauses, the awkward moments, the laughter, or the vulnerability that exists in real intimacy. These missing elements create unrealistic standards that can damage self-esteem and confidence. People begin to compare themselves or their partners to what they see online, thinking something must be wrong if reality doesn't look that polished. This comparison leads to pressure, anxiety, and a sense of inadequacy that can make genuine connection harder to achieve. Porn also shapes expectations about roles and behavior. It often emphasizes dominance, submission, and extreme acts without context or communication, which can teach people to ignore emotional boundaries. It can blur the line between desire and control, turning sex into something that looks more like a performance of power than a shared experience. When people bring these expectations into real relationships, they can unintentionally create discomfort or misunderstanding, especially if one partner feels pressured to act in ways that don't feel natural or respectful. Real sex, unlike what is shown in porn, is deeply human. It's full of emotion, tenderness, mistakes, and learning. It involves asking questions, expressing needs, and adjusting to each other's rhythms. It is not about looking perfect or doing what's been seen on a screen. It's about connection and communication. The more people understand this, the more they can separate fantasy from reality and experience sex as something alive, mutual, and honest. Letting go of the scripted image of sex allows space for something far more fulfilling, authentic intimacy, grounded in respect, empathy, and presence. Consent is often discussed as a simple yes or no, but in reality, it is much deeper and more complex than that. It's not just about asking for permission. Once it's about creating an ongoing dialogue built on mutual respect, trust, and awareness. True consent happens when both people feel completely safe, comfortable, and free to express their boundaries without fear of judgment or pressure. It's about listening, observing, and being present enough to notice when someone's body language, tone, or energy changes. Sometimes people say yes even when they are unsure or uncomfortable, because they don't want to upset their partner or feel guilty. That's why consent isn't just verbal, it's emotional and energetic as well. In a healthy sexual experience, both partners should feel empowered to communicate openly before, during, and after intimacy. Asking, "Is this okay?" or "Do you like this?" is not awkward, it's an act of care. It shows that you value the other person's comfort as much as your own. Consent is about enthusiasm, not obligation. If one person feels pressured, uncertain, or disconnected, the dynamic shifts from mutual enjoyment to imbalance. When consent is treated as ongoing, it creates an atmosphere of safety where vulnerability can exist without fear. Another important aspect of consent is self. It means knowing your own boundaries and being honest about what you want or don't want. Too often, people ignore their discomfort to please someone else, only to feel guilt or resentment afterward. Real consent honors both people equally. It requires honesty from both sides. It also recognizes that anyone can change their mind at any time, and that stopping is always an option. Respecting that choice strengthens trust rather than breaking it. When consent is fully understood and practiced, it transforms the sexual experience. It shifts the focus from taking to sharing, from assumption to communication. It builds emotional intimacy because both people know they are being respected and heard. Consent becomes less about rules and more about empathy, the kind that says, "I care about your experience as much as my own." In this way, consent is not a restriction but a foundation. It's what allows real connection, emotional safety, and pleasure to exist in their most honest and human form. The most overlooked truth about sex is that it begins in the mind long before it happens in the body. Physical attraction may spark desire, but genuine intimacy grows from emotional connection, trust, and communication. When two people connect mentally and emotionally, the physical side of sex becomes richer and more meaningful. It's not just about what happens in the moment, it's about the comfort, curiosity, and safety built through openness and honesty. When people feel seen, heard, and accepted, their guard drops, and they can be fully present. That presence is what creates real pleasure and deep satisfaction. Great sex doesn't rely on technique or performance. It thrives on awareness and empathy. It's about paying attention, listening to subtle cues, and responding with care. Anyone can learn physical moves, but understanding what makes your partner feel safe, confident, and appreciated takes emotional intelligence. When two people communicate, openly sharing what they enjoy, what they fear, and what boundaries they need respected, they create a space where pleasure and connection naturally grow. There is no pressure to impress, no need to pretend, because the experience becomes about mutual exploration rather than expectation. Emotional intimacy also helps dismantle the insecurities and shame that often surround sex. Many people carry fears of rejection, performance anxiety, or body image issues, which can interfere with connection. When intimacy is grounded in emotional trust, those fears begin to fade. A partner who listens, reassures, and values more than just the physical body helps create a sense of safety that makes vulnerability feel natural rather than scary. In that environment, sex becomes not only an act of pleasure, but also one of healing and affirmation. Ultimately, what makes sex truly meaningful is not the act itself, but the connection behind it. When both partners are mentally and emotionally present, they can sense each other's energy, respond intuitively, and experience a flow that feels effortless and genuine. It stops being about control or performance and becomes an exchange of authenticity and care. The mind shapes the experience. How we feel, what we imagine, and how deeply we trust determines the quality of intimacy. When connection starts from the mind and heart, the body simply follows. Turning sex into something far deeper than physical satisfaction, it becomes an expression of real closeness and shared humanity.